Hey, welcome back there, guys. This is going to be part 3 of our introductory little getting started in Maya with module number 1. So we're leaving off what we had before, where again, we've already have our performance of our ball rolling, animating, keying, stopping, everything done, looking good. And in this part, I'm going to basically talk about not only just how to create a Playblast, but also how to define what's called the render settings, because the screen that we're looking at right now is going to be different as far as the size and the resolution, depending upon the screen you're using. So something that's pretty cool here is to go to View and activate what's called the camera settings of resolution gate. And you notice suddenly it shows you that even though this is the full screen, what is inside this zone here is actually what will be rendered. Now, if we don't know what we've defined it, we haven't done 720/480, we haven't chosen 1920 by 1080, but if we want to actually define the camera settings, one quick way we can do that, the easiest way to do that is to go up here to the render settings. Now this is, of course, as if we wanted to actually eventually render this, okay, using the Maya renderer instead of just a Playblast. But this is a great setup point to kind of say, hey, let me set the render settings. And of course, we'll get into Maya hardware, Maya software, we'll get into dealing with mental ray or even some of the other render that's available. But all I really want to do here in the settings is, you can see we've got a couple different file types to do with. Now, when it comes to rendering, again, not the Playblast. Right now, we're going to just deal with the Playblast, but I want to show you how we can set things up eventually. You see, we get AVI, we get a couple different file formats here. Now, if I want to actually render a sequence eventually, I'm actually going to choose Targa. And that is because when you render an AVI or you render a QuickTime, which I believe some of the former resources told you to do, it takes longer because it not only does it have to render each frame, but it has to hold that in memory so it can eventually convert it to a video file. We're going to choose Targa, and I'll get back to this in another lesson here. When it comes to, and when we start to add lighting, we start to add textures to make it look prettier, of why we would use a Targa. Also, you can see here, this is currently set to single frame. Eventually, we want to choose the last option, which is name_number. I can scroll on down here, and you see it says start frame, end frame. Well, my example I've got here actually stops at 144. And I can keep going, and it says, what camera am I doing? Well, I'm in the perspective camera because I have not created a custom camera yet. Eventually, later on assignments, we'll actually create a custom camera. But this is the most important here, image size. And here it says preset is to 540. Well, that's 960 by 540, and I don't know anybody that uses that size anymore. So just choose automatically here HD 1080. That's going to give us a 1920 by 1080 full resolution. And like I said, I will come back to this at a later time because we can talk here about the quality, turning on things like ray tracing for reflections, refractions, and so on. But for now, I'm just going to hit close. But what I did is I set up the camera settings or the render settings for this file because I'm going to use those settings to define the Playblast. Now, what the Playblast is the screen resolution, RAM quality that we're looking at here on screen. And it creates a video file of that, as opposed to actually, you know, in better terms, putting it in the oven and baking on all the textures, baking on the lighting, and making it look real pretty with shadows and all that. We're going to talk about that at a later time. But for now, we're going to talk about creating a Playblast. To make a Playblast, we go to Windows, Playblast, Option Box. And you see some of the options it gives me here. For instance, it allows me to work with time slider, which is the length of the time in my slider, which I've already defined, or I can choose a specific start-end, start frame, end frame. Now remember, I set this up in the render settings, so it's already set up. I can include the view, which means it'll include the word perspective. It'll show any ornaments like the axes if I want to include that. Moving on down here, you see the format by default is an AVI. Now the problem with the Playblast inside of Maya is that it only gives us a choice of an image, like a JPEG sequence, or an AVI. Now, we can do an AVI, and I'm going to talk about how to use an AVI. The problem I'm getting with students that have submitted their work already is that these AVIs are uncompressed, meaning they're very large and they take a very long time to download. I don't need to have that high quality, perfectly large AVI uncompressed. I want an MPEG-4. So we're going to stick with an AVI to start. You see, I do have some coding, but you notice it doesn't give me here with my AVI is an MPEG-4 coding. So we're just going to leave it uncompressed here. We can tell the quality to be 100%. We're going to display the size from the render settings. That's because that's why I already set up the render settings to define in 1920 by 1080. We can set scale to 1 or 100%. And then coming down here, you can see it's going to be save to file. It's going to give the movie file a name. Now, this is where I want you guys to say, you know, put your, I'll name it appropriately. This would be your last name and what the assignment is. So assignment 1 or whatever assignment, I'm just going to give it assignment 1 just so I have the proper name here. And we can hit browse to say where it's going to save, but we also don't have to hit browse to save it to a specific folder if we've already file set project. If we already filed and created the project and designated the project of where we were saving this to, it will automatically save it to the movie folder for that project. So now I just hit Playblast. And you're going to see it's going to chug down along the bottom, and it's going to record my performance here as an uncompressed AVI. Notice how it's going a little bit slower than real time because it's having to build this very large AVI. Okay? Now, when that's done, you can see it's actually going to open it up and show you the real-time version, which looks pretty good. Okay? But that AVI now is not what I want to deal with. Okay? So this is where, for some of you, I recommend downloading what's called the Media Encoder so we can convert it to an H.264, or just simply launch After Effects. Because the After Effects is just a special thing that we're going to get to deeper when it comes to how to render out a sequence of images out of Maya. So again, you would have, in this case, it would be like assignment, you know, or rolling ball 1, rolling ball 2, rolling ball 3, and it's going to save 24 frames per second. And then in After Effects, we import that sequence so that we can not only put our name on it, but we could also export it as the proper video file format, an MPEG-4. So I launched Adobe After Effects. And again, we could just simply, I'll come back to this at a later time. Obviously, After Effects is a very important tool. And I can come here to File, Import File, and find that video that I just created. Which should be, again, in my project folder. See, this is where I need to, where did I put that project folder? Oh, see? This is where I should be in Maya. Now, where did it save? Look at this. It actually says at the bottom here, saved in desktop 3D animation, module tool, blah, 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 movies. So let's go ahead and find that. Import file, desktop. There it is. Now again, I put this in module tool just because that's what I used in the first little lesson here. I go to movies. There's my AVI uncompressed. And it should be pretty large, 854 megabytes. That's enormous. So let's downsize it a little bit. So I'm going to import it in, simply drag it down to the bottom. This is good old After Effects here, and you can scrub through and see the actual performance of it, see? But what I probably want to do here, just for the sake of things, and you should get used to this as well, is just get used to putting your name here, right? So you could basically put, you know, I'll just do this, your name here. What is this, right? This is MAAA 232, I think, which is 3D, whoops. And this is just where you put the information you need. You know, you could say done in software, you could say AI, you could put the date. Just putting your name on here says a lot, though, okay? So I've got it, it's loaded in After Effects, and now it's time to export it out of After Effects as an MPEG-4, which is a very, very lightweight file. Composition, add to Media Encoder. Don't add to Render Queue because that does not give us proper H.264. Go add to Media Encoder Queue. And this now will launch the Adobe Media Encoder, which allows us to kind of put it in the oven, and save it as a lightweight H.264 MPEG-4 video. We're not making masterpieces here, guys. We don't need to worry about like really high quality. Do not give me 4K. Don't give me 8K. We're not making, you know, like masterpieces of animation. We're learning the basics of 3D animation, and the performance and the real-time playback is far more important than worrying about coloring, texturing, you know, beautiful pictures. All right, so you're going to notice here in Media Encoder that it's going to pop up in here in a second. It's basically reading that file from After Effects, and it's going to load up right here in my queue. And then there's about 3 or 4 steps we need to then convert it to the H.264 MPEG-4 format we need. There it is. See, just popped up. So the steps we have to hit is click on this button. Now, if you're working on a Mac, usually this first default button says QuickTime or MOV. If you're working on, let's say, a PC, oftentimes the default here is AVI. Mine says H.264 because that's what I've got it programmed to automatically convert to. You see here, I can scrub through and see if I have extra stuff I don't need. I can put my little blockers off here. I can come here to my format, choose H.264. On the preset size, I can say high or medium bit rate. That's just going to make it a little bit lighter. I have no problem with high bit rate here. And output name. Choose output name. Go back here to my desktop here. Oh, where was it? It was 3D animation. Right, back to my movies. And I'm going to just call it last name, assignment 1, save. I don't have audio, so I could turn that off if I want to, or I could even add audio in After Effects, and I hit OK. Now, nothing is done until we hit this green arrow. This actually does the process here of encoding. So I do that. It's going to show me my little preview window down here showing the progress as it converts that to an MPEG-4. And the most important thing to take into account here, guys, is when I put the 2 files together. The one that Playblast I pulled out of Maya, that was an uncompressed AVI, compared to the MPEG-4 H.264 compressed version, is that it's going to be probably about maybe at 1/10 the size. And that's what I want you guys to upload. I don't want you to fight with big files here. See, it's all done. I can even clear my queue, clear it, minimize it. Even here, if I want to, I can even take this and just save this as, so that I can even replace, so that every file I bring in can be done there. Okay? So that now, let's see it here. Let's see, desktop, 3D animation. In the movie files is where I placed it. So again, the uncompressed AVI, remember, was something like 800 megs, 854 megabytes, huge. The H.264 version that I just brought out of Media Encoder is only 1 megabyte. 800 megabytes, 1.7 megabytes. Which one is better quality? They're both the same pretty much. So then this is what you would then upload to the submission folder as needed. All right, so that's about all I have for this little section here. I'm going to get back to showing you guys a little bit more, but just remember, this kind of showed about how to make a Playblast, how to set your project folder, your project settings for the rendering, and just kind of get you guys on the ground running, understanding this Maya a little bit more. Thank you.